My name is Elizabeth, and I used to believe that silence meant peace. Now I know better. The message didn't come as a message. That's what made it worse. It came as absence. For 3 days straight, I kept checking my phone. Not obsessively at first, just occasionally, the way you check the weather or glance at a clock. But by the third day, it wasn't casual anymore. It was deliberate, careful, almost desperate. Every year, my daughter Caroline sent out invitations for New Year's dinner. Not formal ones, just a cheerful message in the family group chat, something like dinner at ours, 6 p.m., don't be late, followed by a string of emojis I never quite understood. This year, nothing came. At first, I told myself she was busy. She had always been busy. Work, friends, her husband Daniel's endless business dinners. Life moved quickly for her, faster than I could keep up with sometimes. I tried not to take it personally, but time has a way of sharpening doubt. On the fourth day, I opened the chat myself. The invitation was there. Sent 2 days ago. Everyone had responded. My son-in-law's sister, their friends, even neighbors I had never met. Messages filled with laughter, confirmations, jokes. My name was the only one missing.
No tag, no mention.
No question. Just absence. I stared at the screen long enough for it to dim, then tapped it again, as if the light would somehow reveal a mistake. But there wasn't one. It was deliberate.
Clean, quiet.
I had not been forgotten. I had been excluded. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and looked around the room. Everything was in its place. The kettle still warm. The chair across from me, empty as always. The window, slightly fogged from the cold outside. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I didn't cry. Not then. Tears require a kind of permission, and I wasn't ready to give it. Instead, I stood up and walked to the cupboard where I kept my good plates. The ones I only used when someone came over. White porcelain with a thin gold rim, slightly worn but still elegant. I took one out, then another. Then I stopped. There was no one coming. A strange thought crossed my mind then, not sadness, not even anger, but something quieter. Relief. I didn't have to cook for 10 people. I didn't have to pretend to enjoy conversations that skimmed the surface of my life without ever touching it. I didn't have to sit at a table where I felt like an extra chair someone forgot to remove. And yet, I still wanted to be there. That was the part that stung. I sat down again and finally picked up my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen. I could write something simple. Hey, I think I missed the invitation. Or maybe something lighter. Hope I'm still welcome? I even typed it. Then I deleted it. Because the truth was, if they wanted me there, I would already be invited. I wasn't going to ask for a place in my own family. Not anymore. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made dinner just for myself. Not leftovers. Not something quick. A real meal. Roasted vegetables, a small piece of salmon, a glass of wine I had been saving for a special occasion. I set the table properly. One plate, one glass, one fork. It felt strange at first, almost theatrical, like I was pretending to be someone else. Someone who enjoyed solitude instead of enduring it. But as I sat there, something shifted. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt honest. No forced laughter.
No polite interruptions.
No careful editing of my thoughts to keep the peace. Just me. I took a sip of wine and leaned back in my chair. When did I become optional? I said out loud. The room didn't answer, of course. But the question lingered. Later that night, I opened the old wooden drawer in my living room. The one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents neatly stacked. Insurance papers. Bank statements. And beneath them, a folder labeled in my own handwriting. Estate plan. I ran my fingers over it, not opening it yet. I had written it years ago, when everything still felt intact. When I believed that fairness was the same as love. When I assumed that what I gave would always be understood. Now, I wasn't so sure. I closed the drawer without taking the folder out. Not yet. Some decisions need a moment to breathe before they're made. Instead, I went to the window. Outside, the city was alive. Lights flickering in other apartments, people moving behind curtains, laughter spilling faintly into the night air. Somewhere, families were gathering. Somewhere, someone was being welcomed. And somewhere, someone else was realizing they weren't. I rested my hand against the cold glass. "I'm still here," I whispered. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a question. It felt like a beginning. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset in the way people expect. No tears, no pacing, no dramatic thoughts, but because something inside me had quietly shifted, and once that kind of shift happens, your mind refuses to settle back into its old shape. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room, and kept replaying the same realization. They didn't forget me. They chose not to include me. By morning, the feeling had sharpened into something else. Not anger exactly. Clarity. I made coffee, stronger than usual, and stood by the kitchen window while the city moved into another cold, ordinary day. People hurried past with scarves pulled tight, cars crept through intersections. Someone across the street laughed too loudly into their phone. Life was happening everywhere, indifferent and continuous, and for the first time I noticed how little of it had anything to do with my family. That thought should have made me feel small. Instead, it made me feel free. I sat down at the table with my coffee and opened the group chat again. The messages had continued overnight. Plans, jokes, a photo of the dining table already half set at Caroline's house. Crystal glasses. Gold napkins. Everything polished, everything perfect. No place for me. I stared at the photo longer than I needed to, then locked my phone and set it aside. "Fine," I said quietly. "Then I'll decide for myself." The idea came slowly, almost cautiously, like it wasn't sure it was allowed to exist. I would go anyway, not to beg for a seat, not to ask permission, but because I refused to disappear just because someone had decided I should. Once the thought settled, it didn't leave. By noon, I was already preparing. I opened my wardrobe and stood there longer than necessary, running my hand across clothes I hadn't worn in months. Most of them were practical, comfortable, invisible, but tucked in the back was a navy dress I used to wear to dinners, back when I was still part of things. I took it out. It still fit. A little looser than before, maybe, but that didn't matter. I smoothed it down, looked at myself in the mirror, and for a brief second I saw a version of myself I hadn't seen in a long time. Not older, not younger, just present. I brushed my hair more carefully than usual, added a pair of earrings I hadn't worn since last year, and even put on lipstick. Not because anyone would notice, but because I would. That mattered more. Then I moved to the kitchen. If I was going, I wasn't going empty-handed. I decided to make something simple, something familiar. A dish Caroline used to love when she was younger. Lemon chicken with herbs. She used to stand on a chair beside me, asking too many questions, insisting on stirring everything herself. I smiled at the memory, even as something tight pulled at my chest. People don't just forget love like that. They choose to outgrow it. Still, I cooked. Carefully. Slowly. Not rushing, not cutting corners. If I was going to walk into that house, I would do it as myself, not as someone diminished by their absence. By late afternoon, everything was ready. I packed the dish into a container, wrapped it neatly, and stood there for a moment with it in my hands. This was the moment where I could still change my mind. Stay home. Avoid the awkwardness. Protect what little dignity I still had. But dignity, I realized, wasn't about avoiding discomfort. It was about refusing to erase yourself. So I put on my coat, picked up the container, and left. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and unapologetic. It made my eyes water, my breath visible in the air. I walked slowly at first, then steadier, letting my body adjust, letting my thoughts settle into something firm and quiet. I didn't rush. If anything, I wanted the walk. Time to prepare. Time to remind myself why I was doing this. Not for them.
For me.
Caroline's house wasn't far, but it felt farther than usual that evening. Each step carried a weight I couldn't quite name, a mixture of memory and anticipation. I had walked this path so many times before, always welcomed, always expected. Tonight was different. Tonight, I was stepping into uncertainty. When I reached her street, I saw the lights immediately. Warm, golden, inviting. The kind of light that promises laughter and belonging. I almost stopped right there. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The windows glowed, silhouettes moved inside, and faint music drifted into the night air. It was exactly how it always was. Except this time, I wasn't part of it. I tightened my grip on the container and walked forward. The closer I got, the louder the sounds became. Voices, glasses clinking, someone laughing. Normal. So painfully normal. I reached the door and stood there for a moment, my hand hovering just inches from the surface. This was it. The line between staying invisible and refusing to be. A small voice inside me whispered, "Don't do this. Turn around. Go home." But another voice, quieter but stronger, answered,
No.
I knocked. The sound echoed more than I expected, sharp against the wood, cutting through the noise inside. For a second, nothing happened. Then footsteps approached. The door opened. It was Daniel. He froze when he saw me. Not shocked, not confused, just caught. "Elizabeth," he said, and even in that one word I heard it. The hesitation, the calculation, the sudden shift from comfort to inconvenience. "Hello, Daniel," I replied calmly. There was a pause, just long enough to say everything that wasn't being said. Then, from somewhere behind him, Caroline's voice. "Who is it?" He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. She appeared a second later, stepping into view, and the moment she saw me, her expression changed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but I saw it. That flicker, that instant of discomfort. "Mom," she said. I held up the container slightly. "I brought dinner," I said. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that stretches, that exposes, that forces everyone to acknowledge what they'd rather ignore. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "I know," I replied. Another pause. Behind her, I could see the table.
Full.
Beautiful. Carefully arranged. No empty seats. Of course. I was in the neighborhood. I added, though we both knew that wasn't true. Thought I'd stop by. Daniel stepped aside slightly, but not fully. Not an invitation. Just an uncertainty. Caroline hesitated. And in that hesitation, everything became clear. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't unexpected. I was unwanted. Something inside me settled then. Not broken. Not hurt in the way I expected. Just certain. I stepped forward anyway. "May I come in?" I asked. Caroline didn't answer immediately. That was the first thing I noticed as I stood there in the doorway, the cold still clinging to my coat, and the warmth from inside brushing against my face like something I wasn't quite allowed to feel. Her eyes flicked past me for just a second, as if she were checking whether anyone else had seen me yet, whether this moment could still be contained, managed, smoothed over before it became real. That was always her way, control first, emotion later. Of course, she said finally, stepping aside, but the word came a second too late, and I heard it. That thin edge of reluctance that no amount of politeness could fully hide. I stepped in. The warmth wrapped around me instantly, thick with the smell of roasted meat, wine, and something sweet, cinnamon, maybe.
Familiar. Panfeli familiar.
I had stood in kitchens like this for decades, orchestrating meals, making sure everything came together just right. Now I was a guest in a place that had once felt like an extension of my own home. Daniel closed the door behind me, quieter than usual, like he didn't want to draw attention. But it was too late for that. A few heads had already turned from the dining room, conversation slowing, curiosity spreading in small ripples across the space. I took off my coat slowly, deliberately, giving myself a moment to adjust, to gather whatever part of me still needed gathering. "You can put that in the kitchen," Caroline said, nodding toward the container in my hands. "Not let me take it. Not that smells amazing. Just instructions." "Of course," I said. I walked into the kitchen, my step steady even as my chest tightened. Everything was arranged perfectly. Dishes lined up with precision, glasses polished, counters spotless. It was beautiful in the way things are when they're meant to be seen, not lived in. I placed my dish on the counter and removed the lid just slightly, letting the steam escape. The scent of lemon and herbs filled the space for a moment, softer than the heavier smells already present. For a second, I imagined someone noticing, asking, remembering. No one did. When I turned back toward the dining room, I saw them all more clearly now. Caroline's friends, her husband's colleagues, people I had met once or twice, people who had never really learned my name. They smiled politely, the way you smile at someone you're trying to place but can't quite categorize. "Elizabeth," someone said, "Daniel's sister, I think. Didn't know you were coming." "Neither did I thought." "Last minute," I replied with a small smile. Caroline had already moved back to the table, slipping into her seat as if nothing had happened, as if I had always been part of the evening. That was the performance. Smooth, seamless, controlled. Except for one thing. There was no seat for me. I stood there for a moment, just long enough to be sure I wasn't mistaken. The table was full. Every chair occupied. Every place set. Plates, napkins, glasses, all accounted for.
Just not me.
It's a strange thing, realizing you don't exist in a space that physically surrounds you. Stranger still when you're expected to pretend you don't notice. Caroline looked up at me again, that same flicker passing through her expression. "Oh," she said lightly, as if this were a minor oversight. "We didn't expect. I mean, I can get another chair." "Another chair."
Not your chair.
"Another." "It's fine," I said before she could move. And I meant it. Not because it didn't matter, but because suddenly it mattered in a completely different way. Daniel stood halfway, unsure whether to offer his seat, then sat back down when no one else moved. The moment passed quickly, swallowed by conversation, by laughter that resumed just a little too loudly, just a little too quickly. I stepped back slightly, moving toward the edge of the room. "I'll just stand for a bit," I added. Caroline nodded, relieved. Of course she was. Standing there, I watched them. Not with bitterness. Not even with sadness. Not in the way I would have expected. It was more like watching a scene I used to belong to, one I had memorized so well I could predict every line, every gesture, every polite interruption. But now I was outside of it. And from the outside, everything looked different. I saw how carefully everyone curated themselves. The way conversations stayed light, safe, never dipping too deep. The way laughter filled gaps instead of connection. The way attention shifted toward whoever was most useful, most entertaining, most relevant. I had spent years trying to be all of those things, and still here I was, uninvited, unseated, unnecessary. Daniel poured more wine, passing glasses around, skipping me without even realizing it. Caroline leaned toward one of her friends, laughing at something I couldn't hear. Someone complimented the food. Someone else raised a toast. To new beginnings, a man said, lifting his glass. Everyone echoed it. New beginnings. I almost smiled, because for them, it meant another year, another cycle, another performance dressed up as celebration. For me, it meant something else entirely. I stepped back further, moving into the hallway where the noise softened just enough to think. That's when I noticed the mirror. An old one, decorative, probably chosen for style more than function.
But it caught me anyway.
I looked at my reflection. Navy dress, carefully brushed hair, earrings catching the light just slightly. I didn't look out of place. I looked invisible. And suddenly, something inside me clicked into place. Not with anger, with precision. I turned back toward the dining room. Caroline caught my eye just for a second. I'm going to head out, I said calmly. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. Oh, already? Yes. A pause. You just got here. I know. There was a moment where she could have said something real, something honest, something that acknowledged what had just happened. She didn't. Well, she said, smoothing her napkin slightly. Thanks for stopping by. Stopping by. Like I was a neighbor. Like I hadn't spent years building the very foundation she now stood on. I nodded. Enjoy your evening. I turned before she could respond. No one stopped me. Not Daniel. Not her friends. Not a single voice calling after me. I walked back through the hallway, picked up my coat, and stepped outside. The cold hit harder this time.
Sharper. Cleaner.
I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs completely. And then something unexpected happened. I didn't feel rejected. I felt released. Like I had just been quietly removed from a role I no longer needed to play. I walked slowly down the path, the sounds of laughter fading behind me, replaced by the quiet hum of the city at night. The air was colder now, the streets emptier, but everything felt more real somehow. For years, I had tried to stay included, tried to adapt, to adjust, to make myself easier, smaller, more convenient. And for what? A standing place in a room that no longer had space for me. I stopped at the corner and looked back once. The house still glowed, still perfect, still full. But it didn't pull at me anymore. It just existed. I turned away. By the time I reached home, my hands were cold, my feet aching slightly, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I stepped inside, closed the door, and leaned against it for a moment. The silence greeted me, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the table. One chair, one place. Enough. My eyes drifted to the drawer, the one I hadn't opened earlier. Slowly, I stood up, walked over, and pulled it open. The folder was still there. Estate plan. This time, I took it out. I didn't open the folder right away. I just stood there in the middle of the room, holding it in both hands like it carried more than paper inside. In a way, it did. It held years, decisions made quietly, assumptions left unchallenged, love translated into numbers and signatures. For a long time, I had believed this folder was a form of care, a final gesture of fairness, something that would outlive me and speak on my behalf when I no longer could. Now, standing there alone in my kitchen, I realized it had been something else entirely. It had been permission. Permission for them to take me for granted. I walked back to the table and sat down slowly, placing the folder in front of me. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. It sounded louder tonight, sharper, like it was marking something important. I opened the folder. The papers were exactly as I remembered.
Clean.
Organized.
Precise.
My handwriting on some pages, a lawyer's on others. Names clearly listed. Percentages carefully divided. Everything equal. Everything fair. Caroline. My son, Matthew. Shared accounts. Property allocations. Notes about investments. Instructions that assumed a certain kind of relationship would always exist. I read through it slowly, line by line, not because I didn't know what was there, but because I needed to see it differently now. Needed to read it not as the woman who wrote it years ago, but as the woman sitting here tonight. That woman had believed in something. This one no longer did. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. Not heavy, not emotional, just final. Fair isn't the same as right, I said quietly. The words settled into the room like they had been waiting to be spoken. For a moment I thought about leaving it as it was. Not out of indecision, but out of habit. It would be easier, less complicated, less confrontational. But easy had cost me too much already. I reached for my phone and scrolled until I found the number. Mr. Halstead, my lawyer for nearly 15 years. A careful man, patient, never rushed. The kind of person who understood that decisions like these weren't just legal, they were personal. I hesitated for only a second before pressing call. It rang longer than I expected. Then his voice, slightly surprised. Elizabeth? Everything all right? Yes, I said. Everything is finally becoming all right.
A pause.
I'd like to schedule a meeting, I continued. As soon as possible. Of course, he replied. Is this about your estate plan? It is. Another pause. Shorter this time, but more deliberate. I see. Has something changed? I looked down at the open folder in front of me. Yes, I said. Everything has. We set a time for the next morning. After I hung up, I didn't close the folder. I left it open on the table, like something that needed to stay visible, something I couldn't tuck away again. That night I slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes when a decision has already been made, even if the world around you hasn't caught up yet. The next morning, I dressed simply. No navy dress this time.
No careful presentation.
Just myself as I was. The air outside was colder than the night before, sharper against my skin, but I didn't rush. I walked at my own pace, steady and unhurried, the folder tucked neatly under my arm. Mr. Halstead's office hadn't changed. Same quiet hallway, same muted colors, same faint smell of paper and polish. It was the kind of place where time didn't move quickly, and for once I appreciated that. He greeted me with a small nod, more observant than expressive. Elizabeth, he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. Please. I sat down and placed the folder in front of him. I want to revise everything, I said. He didn't react immediately. Just opened the folder and glanced through the pages, as if confirming what he already suspected. That's a significant change, he said carefully. Yes. Would you like to explain your reasoning for the record? I considered that for a moment, not because I didn't have reasons, but because I wasn't sure they needed to be recorded. They've built their lives without me, I said finally. This is simply me acknowledging that. He nodded slowly. Understood.
No judgment.
No questions. Just acceptance. That was why I trusted him. We went through everything, line by line, name by name, and with each change, something inside me grew lighter. Not because I was taking something away, but because I was finally aligning what I gave with what was real. I didn't rush. I didn't act out of anger. Every decision was deliberate, measured.
Clear.
When we reached the section that listed Caroline and Matthew as primary beneficiaries, I paused. Mr. Halstead looked up. Would you like to adjust these allocations? Yes, I said. Another pause. And who would you like to include instead? I leaned back slightly, folding my hands in my lap. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then I spoke. Not instead, I said. Differently. He waited. I'm creating something new, I continued. A fund. Scholarships. Support for women who are starting over later in life. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression remained composed. That's very specific. Yes. It sounds important to you. It is. He nodded and began making notes. We continued for another hour, reshaping everything, not as a reaction, as a correction. When it was done, he printed the revised documents and placed them in front of me. Take your time, he said. I read through them carefully, not out of doubt, but out of respect for the decision. When I finished, I signed. My hand didn't shake, not even slightly. Mr. Halstead took the papers, reviewed them briefly, then nodded. It's done, he said. Just 2 words. But they carried weight. I stood up, adjusting my coat. Thank you, I said. He gave a small, knowing smile. Most people wait too long to make changes like this, he said. If they make them at all. I already did, I replied. I'm just fixing that now. Outside, the air felt different. Not warmer, not softer, just clearer. I walked slowly, not heading anywhere in particular, just letting myself exist in the space I had finally reclaimed. For years, I had thought strength meant holding things together, keeping peace, maintaining balance. But now I understood something else. Sometimes strength is letting things fall into their natural place, even if that place doesn't include you. I stopped at a small cafe on the corner, somewhere I had passed dozens of times but never entered. Today, I did. I ordered tea and sat by the window, watching people move through their day. No one knew me. No one expected anything from me. It was strangely comforting. I took a sip of tea and let the warmth settle. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I had taken back.
My time.
My choices. My voice. And somewhere, quietly but firmly, I realized something else. They were going to notice. Not immediately. Not all at once. But eventually. Because people don't notice your presence as much as they notice your absence. Especially when it comes with consequences. I set my cup down gently and looked out the window. I didn't disappear, I said under my breath. I stepped away. And that, I knew, would matter far more than anything I had ever given them before. The first call came 3 days later. I had just finished watering the plants by the window, something I had started doing more deliberately, as if small routines deserved more attention now that I had fewer distractions, when my phone lit up on the table.
Caroline.
I looked at the screen for a long moment, not with hesitation, but with curiosity. Timing is rarely accidental. People don't suddenly remember you without a reason. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Elizabeth, she said. Not, Mom. Not this time. That told me everything I needed to know. Hello, Caroline, I replied. A brief pause. Not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to register. I was wondering if you had a moment to talk, she said, her voice carefully neutral, like she was choosing each word before allowing it to exist. I do, I said. Go ahead. Another pause. I could almost hear her adjusting her posture on the other end, preparing. I spoke with Mr. Halstead this morning. Of course she did. I see, I said. He mentioned that there have been some changes. Yes. Silence. Not empty.
Heavy.
I just wanted to understand what's going on, she continued, because this feels a bit sudden. I almost smiled. Does it? I asked. Yes, she said a little too quickly. I mean, we haven't had any major issues, and then suddenly, we haven't. I interrupted gently. That stopped her. There it was. The gap between reality and narrative. I didn't realize we were having a problem, she said, more cautiously now. I didn't realize I needed an invitation to be part of my own family, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. That's not fair, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. I could hear her breathing, slightly uneven now, the careful control beginning to slip just a little. That dinner, she started, was not about the dinner, I finished. Silence again, because now we were closer to the truth than she was comfortable with. I think you're overreacting, she said finally, her voice tightening. You showed up unexpectedly. We were already full. It wasn't intentional. Caroline, I said quietly, there was no seat for me because no one planned for me to be there. That's because we didn't know you were coming. And I didn't know I wasn't invited. The words landed. I didn't need to raise my voice. Truth has its own weight. I think this is being blown out of proportion, she said, but there was less certainty now. Changing everything like this, it feels extreme. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the plants I had just watered. Their leaves caught the light in small, quiet ways. They didn't ask for attention. They simply grew where they were tended. This didn't start 3 days ago, I said. It just became visible then. She didn't answer. You built a life, I continued. You made choices. You decided who was included and who wasn't. I respected that. That's not. I didn't interfere. I went on, not raising my voice, not pushing, just stating. I didn't question it. I adjusted. A long silence followed. And now I'm doing the same, I finished. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Softer, but not warmer. So that's it, she asked. You're just cutting us out? No, I said. I'm adjusting my involvement to match reality. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. Another pause. I could feel her searching for something, an argument, a justification, something that would put things back into a structure she understood. This is going to affect more than just you, she said finally. There are expectations. Plans. You know that. Yes, I said.
Ido.
And you're okay with disrupting all of that? I let out a small breath. They were already disrupted, I said. You just didn't notice because it wasn't inconvenient for you yet. That one landed harder. I could hear it in the silence that followed. You're being unfair, she said again, but now it sounded thinner, less grounded. Possibly, I replied, but I'm also being honest. We stayed like that for a moment, two people on opposite sides of something that had been building for years. Finally, she spoke again. So what happens now? She asked. It was a real question. Not defensive. Not strategic. Just uncertain. I appreciated that more than anything else she had said so far. That depends, I said. On what? On whether you want a relationship, I replied. Or just an arrangement. She didn't answer immediately, because now we were past the surface. What's the difference? She asked quietly. I looked down at my hands. The difference, I said, is whether I matter when I'm not useful. that stayed in the air between us, long enough to be understood. I never thought of you that way, she said. I know, I replied. And I meant it. That was the problem. She hadn't thought of it at all. I need some time, she said finally. Of course. I didn't expect this. I didn't either, I said. Another pause. Then more softly. I'll call you again. We'll see, I replied. Not cold, not dismissive, just honest. We ended the call without saying goodbye. I set the phone down and sat there for a while, letting the quiet return. It didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Later that afternoon, there was another call. Matthew. I watched his name appear on the screen and almost laughed. Timing again. This time, I let it ring once before answering. Hey, he said.
No greeting. No formality.
Just casual. Hello, Matthew, I replied. I heard you've been making some changes, he said, getting straight to it. Yes. What's going on? I leaned back slightly, closing my eyes for a second. You can be more specific, I said. He exhaled sharply. Dad's been calling me. Caroline's upset. And now, apparently everything's been rearranged without anyone knowing why. Now you know, I said. That's not an explanation. It's the result.
He paused.
You're serious about this? He asked. I am. Another pause. Then more quietly. Is this about the dinner? No, I said. It's about everything that made that dinner possible. He didn't respond right away, because that required more thought than he was used to giving. You could have just talked to us, he said finally. I did, I replied. Just not out loud. That doesn't count. It does, I said. You just weren't listening. Silence. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said.
No, Iraplia.
I'm making it clearer than it's ever been. He let out a breath, frustrated now. So, what? You're just done with us? I opened my eyes and looked out the window. People were still moving. Life still continuing.
Nothing had stopped because of this.
I'm done pretending, I said. Another long pause. Then quieter. I don't know what you want from us. I thought about that. Really thought. Then answered. Nothing, I said. And for the first time, that was true. After the calls, the house felt different. Not emptier, not quieter, but clearer, like a room after a storm has passed and the air has settled into something you can finally breathe. I didn't replay the conversations the way I might have before. I didn't analyze every word or wonder if I should have said something softer, something more forgiving, something that would have kept the balance intact. That version of me had relied on balance like it was survival. This version understood something else. Balance that depends on silence is not balance at all. I made tea and sat by the window again, the same place I had stood days earlier when everything still felt uncertain. The city moved as it always did, indifferent to personal revelations, but this time I wasn't watching it from the outside. I felt part of it in a way I hadn't before, not because anything around me had changed, but because I had. For years, my world had been structured around them. Their schedules, their needs, their invitations, their omissions. Even my time alone had been shaped by anticipation, waiting for a call, a message, a reason to be included again. I hadn't noticed how much space that waiting had taken up until it was suddenly gone. And in its place, there was something unfamiliar.
Room.
That afternoon, I opened a notebook I hadn't used in years. It was simple, nothing special, just lined pages, slightly yellowed at the edges. I sat at the table and stared at the first blank page for a long time, not because I didn't know what to write, but because I wasn't used to writing for myself anymore. Finally, I picked up a pen. I didn't write a list of tasks or obligations or reminders for someone else. I wrote one sentence. What do I want my days to look like? The question sat there, heavier than I expected. For a moment, I almost laughed. It felt indulgent, unnecessary, even selfish in a way I had been trained to avoid. But I didn't cross it out. I let it stay. Then slowly I began to answer. Not in grand plans or dramatic changes, but in small, specific things. I want to cook because I enjoy it, not because I'm expected to. I want to have conversations that don't feel like obligations. I want to be somewhere I'm noticed without having to remind people I exist. I want to give without feeling like I'm paying for my place. The words came easier after that. Not perfect, not poetic, just honest. By the time I finished, the page wasn't full, but it was enough. Enough to see that I hadn't lost something. I had been given something back. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There's a difference, and it's sharper than people think. I made breakfast slowly, without rushing, without checking my phone, without waiting for interruption. Afterward, I put on my coat and went out. Not to run errands.
Not to fill time. Just to go somewhere.
I walked without a destination at first, letting my steps decide for me, until I found myself standing in front of a small community center I had passed dozens of times before without ever entering. A simple building, slightly worn, with a handwritten notice taped to the door. Volunteers needed. Community meal this weekend. I stood there longer than necessary, reading it twice, then a third time, as if the words might change. They didn't. Something about it felt direct.
No expectations.
No history.
No assumptions.
Just a need.
And a choice.
I opened the door. Inside, the air was warm and filled with movement. Voices overlapping, chairs being moved, the faint clatter of dishes somewhere in the back. It wasn't polished. It wasn't curated. It was real in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. A woman looked up from a table near the entrance. "Can I help you?" she asked.
I saw the sign, I said.
About volunteering. Her face softened immediately. "Oh, yes, of course. We could definitely use more hands."
No hesitation. No calculation.
Just welcome. She introduced herself, explained what they were doing, what they needed, where I could help. It wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. "Have you done something like this before?" she asked. I almost smiled. "Yes," I said. "For most of my life." She laughed lightly, not fully understanding what I meant. "Well, then you'll fit right in."
Fit.
Such a simple word. And yet it landed deeper than anything I had heard in weeks. I stayed for 2 hours that day, not doing anything extraordinary, just helping, organizing, preparing, listening when someone spoke, speaking when it felt natural. No one asked who I used to be. No one expected anything beyond what I offered in that moment. And strangely, that made everything feel more valuable. When I left, the same woman walked me to the door. "Will you come back?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. And I meant it. That evening, I returned home tired in a way that felt different. Not drained. Not depleted.
Just used.
In the best possible sense of the word. I made a simple dinner and sat at the table, the same table that had once felt like a place of waiting. Now it felt like a place of choice. My phone buzzed once while I was eating. A message.
Caroline.
I didn't open it immediately. Not out of avoidance. Out of priority. For the first time, something else came first. When I finished my meal, I wiped my hands, picked up the phone, and read it. "I've been thinking about what you said." That was all.
No apology. No argument.
Just acknowledgement. I stared at the message for a moment, then set the phone down. Not because it didn't matter, but because it wasn't urgent. And that, more than anything, told me how much had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her. Not for anyone. Later that night, I returned to the notebook. I added one more line beneath everything I had written before. I choose where I belong. I closed the notebook and placed it on the table, not hidden, not tucked away, just there, visible, accessible, real. The house was quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet. This one didn't ask for anything. It didn't expect anything. It simply existed. And for the first time in a long while, so did I. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It came quietly, almost cautiously, as if testing whether the world was ready for it. The air softened first, just slightly, enough to make the mornings feel less sharp against my skin. Then the light changed, stretching longer into the evening, touching corners of the house that had been dim for months. And one morning, without announcement, I noticed the first small green shoots pushing through the soil outside my window. I stood there longer than I meant to, watching them. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were inevitable. Life doesn't ask for permission to return. It just does. By then, my days had settled into something steady. Not rigid, not planned to perfection, just consistent in a way that felt earned. I still woke early, still made my tea by the window, but now there was no sense of waiting attached to it. No anticipation of interruption. No quiet hope that someone might call, might remember, might reach out. That space had been filled, not by noise, by presence. My own. The community center had become part of my routine. At first, I went simply to help, to do something useful, something tangible. But over time, it became something else. A place where people didn't measure each other by history or obligation, but by what they brought into the room in that moment. Effort, kindness, attention, simple things, rare things. There was a woman named Helen who always arrived before anyone else, her hair pulled back loosely, hands already moving before her coat was fully off. She never spoke about her past, and no one asked. There was a young man, Daniel, not my Daniel, a different one, who worked quietly in the corner, stacking chairs with a precision that suggested he found comfort in order. And there were others, people passing through, people staying, people rebuilding something no one else could see. And somewhere in the middle of all that, there was me, not as someone's mother, not as someone's responsibility, just Elizabeth. One afternoon, as I was ladling soup into bowls, Helen leaned toward me slightly. "You're different," she said.
Ich glänze her.
"How so?" She shrugged lightly. "You don't look like someone who's waiting anymore." I paused for just a second, then continued what I was doing.
I'm not, I said.
She nodded, as if that was enough. And it was. When I returned home that evening, I found another message on my phone. Caroline again. This time longer. I didn't realize how much distance there had been. I thought everything was fine because nothing was being said. I see now that maybe that was the problem. I don't know how to fix it yet, but I don't want to ignore it anymore. I read it once, then again. Then I set the phone down. Not because it didn't matter, but because I no longer needed it to define anything. For a long time, I had believed that closure came from other people, from apologies, from recognition, from some moment where everything was acknowledged and understood. But standing there in my kitchen, with the soft light of early spring filtering through the window, I realized something simpler. Closure isn't given. It's chosen. I made myself tea and sat down at the table, letting the message exist without reacting to it immediately. That would have been impossible before. I would have felt compelled to respond, to engage, to resolve. Now, I just considered, what did I want? Not what was expected. Not what was polite. Not what would restore the old version of things. What did I actually want? The answer came quietly. I didn't want things to go back. I wanted something new. Something honest. Something that didn't require me to shrink in order to fit. I picked up the phone again and typed slowly. I'm glad you're thinking about it. I am too. When you're ready to talk honestly, we can. I read it once, then sent it. No extra words.
No softening.
No pressure. Just space. I set the phone aside and didn't check it again. Days passed. Not dramatically. Not with sudden changes or emotional breakthroughs. Just days. Lived one after another. Each one reinforcing something that had taken me years to understand. Life doesn't stop when people step away from you. It expands. The garden outside began to change more visibly now. The small green shoots turned into stems, then buds, then color. I found myself spending more time outside, my hands in the soil, not because I had to maintain anything, but because I wanted to be part of something that grew without conditions. One afternoon, while I was kneeling by the garden bed, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn immediately. There was no urgency, no fear, just awareness. Mom? Caroline's voice. I stood slowly, brushing the dirt from my hands before turning to face her. She looked different. Not physically, not in any obvious way, but in the way people do when they've stepped outside of their own certainty. There was less control in her posture, less assumption in her expression, more presence. "Hello, Caroline," I said. She hesitated for a second, then stepped closer. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," she said. "I'm here," I replied. That was enough. We stood there for a moment, the space between us no longer filled with expectation, but not entirely empty either. "I read your message," she said. "I know." I didn't respond because she paused, searching for the right words. Because I didn't want to say something that just put everything back the way it was. I nodded slightly. That would defeat the point. She let out a small breath. "I've been thinking about what you said. About being there only when you're useful." I didn't interrupt. "I don't think I saw it that way," she continued. "But that doesn't mean it wasn't happening."
No defensiveness. No excuses.
Just recognition. That mattered. "I'm not here to argue," she said. "And I'm not here to pretend everything's fine." "Good," I said quietly. Another pause. Then more softly, "I'd like to try again." The words hung there, simple but heavy. Not a demand. Not a solution. Just an offer. I looked at her for a long moment. Not at the version of her I remembered. Not at the version that had excluded me, but at the person standing in front of me now. Uncertain. Trying. "I'm not the same person I was," I said. "I know," she replied. "And I'm not going back to that. I'm not asking you to." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was open. I nodded once. "Then we can start there." Something in her expression shifted. Not relief exactly, but something close. "Okay," she said. We didn't hug. We didn't rush to fill the space with gestures or reassurances. We just stood there, two people acknowledging that something had ended, and something else, something quieter, something more honest, was beginning. After a moment, she glanced at the garden. "These are new," she said. "They are. They look good." I smiled slightly. "They're growing where they're cared for." She nodded, and I think she understood. When she left, I didn't feel like something had been restored. I felt like something had been redefined, and that was better. That evening, I sat by the window again, the same place where this all began. The light was softer now, warmer, stretching across the room in long, quiet lines. The house felt full, not with people, but with something steadier.
Continuity.
I picked up my notebook and opened it to the first page. What do I want my days to look like? I read what I had written weeks ago. Then I added one more line. Like this. I closed the notebook and set it down. Outside, the world continued. Inside, so did I. Not waiting, not asking, not disappearing, just living. And that, I realized, was more than enough.